Hello, Prime Media audiences. This is your host, Ladette Muleta, here in Addis. I am here joined with a special guest today. His name is Simo Pervinian. Mr. Pervinian is very familiar to Ethiopian politics and to Ethiopian diplomacy. Mr. Pervinian, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you taking your time and joining me at Prime Media. Please, I'll moving forward, I'll be calling you Simo. Thank you for joining us. If you could please give us a brief description to our audiences about your experience and who you are, I would appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much, and happy to join your program. And hello to everybody who is watching this program. My name is Simo-Pekka Parviainen, and I'm from Finland, and I am a former professional diplomat in the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I also before I joined the diplomatic service, I was peacekeeper also in the region, both in Ethiopia, Eritrea, mostly Eritrea and Sudan also during the Darfur conflict in 2006. So I've been professionally living and working in East Africa for 10 years, mainly in diplomatic embassy assignments, and my specialty especially is following Horn of Africa issues, Sudan, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and also Africa Union and IGAD. So I was following this professionally for many years, and of course I maintain strong interest and strong analysis on the situation, especially now when it's a very critical time in the region. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Mr. Simo. Wow, it sounds like your experience around the Horn of Africa is perfectly what we need at the moment. You seem to have the experience with the Horn, and currently the Horn is a hot spot, as you know. There's a lot going on in the Horn of Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia. And what are some of your thoughts with what's happening currently? I mean, right now in Addis, the Ethiopian Prime Minister has called on the diaspora, the Ethiopian diaspora, to come and visit home because tourism. There's been a year-long conflict, and embassies have notified their citizens to leave Ethiopia for security reasons and so forth. And the Ethiopian government is really trying to normalize, and the security and peace in the Addis, at least where I am, is very peaceful. So we're expecting and receiving a lot of diasporas from all over the world right now. That's one thing that's going on currently. So what are your thoughts about what's happening?
Well, thank you, Lidette, for the question. I think there is quite a lot to unpack there, and the background, of course, is this very unfortunate conflict which has started almost a year ago. But this initiative for diaspora to come back, it's very positive initiative, and I've seen that a lot of diaspora who are very capable and well educated and have a lot of resources. It's a very welcome time to come back, and I've been seeing that a lot of humanitarian aid and all kind of assistance has been mobilized voluntarily by diaspora. And I've been myself personally engaged in Finland also with the Finnish diaspora Ethiopians, the Association of Ethiopians in Finland, which was established already in the 90s, that they also arranged funding for the war victims in December. So these are very positive and needed engagements. But of course, what comes to the situation, and you mentioned what was the kind of travel advice for what was given by the mainly Western embassies. I can tell from my personal experience, I've been one of the drafters of this kind of advice during my career in East Africa. I know the difficulties of drafting this and what are the consequences. And of course, this has been a terrible mistake from Western embassies to issue this kind of evacuation, because the evacuation is the last resort, and it can create panic, and we can see it's completely, I would use very strong word, laughable, that we see people enjoying in cafes, even foreign tourists from America, from Europe, being recorded in the video saying that what is going on, why this kind of evacuation order is given. So it's completely uncalled for, and it's very, very questionable why this kind of advice has been given. And now, if we come to the current situation on the conflict now, that we see that there is battlefield losses by the TPLF terrorist organization, and they withdraw to Tigray region now. But this is not, this has been portrayed as an opportunity for peace, but it's really a result of battlefield losses that has been inflicted on their kind of adventure to the Amhara and Afar regions, which has created terrible humanitarian disaster and completely overlooked by the Western media and Western policy pronouncements, that it has not been condemned. And also humanitarian aid to these regions in Afar and Amhara, they are slowly starting to trickle to this area, but it seems for reasons yet to be explained, maybe historians can explain us that why this kind of biased approach has been adopted by Western international community. And I've been thinking this quite a lot and following the conflict very closely, because I feel the situation is very critical. I love Ethiopia very much. I have a lot of friends and loved ones in the country, and I want to see peaceful, prosperous, wonderful country. So that's why I'm engaged, and I wanted to make the truth visible and facts visible, what is really going on. So that's why I've been engaged in this reporting and analysis so strongly. And what I want to highlight on this, that the approach adopted by Western international community, and I mean mainly United States of America and European Union and the member state, has been very biased from the beginning, that if there is a political loss in the country, in the internal politics, that in this case TPLF has lost political power, which is enjoyed after authoritarian rule for decades and decades, they resort to violence. So this kind of calling for negotiation with this kind of grouping will encourage also other groupings in Horn of Africa, possibly Ethiopia, the wider region, maybe in the whole continent, to adopt this kind of approach, that whenever we decide that the political election or political negotiations is nothing going on our way, it's not going as we are wishing, we always maintain the option to go, as we say, go back to the bush and start fighting. And the result of this will be reward from international community asking for ceasefire, asking for negotiation. So it will basically mean that violence pays off. And this is the factor that in my analysis, after all these years and years of expertise in Horn of Africa, in Africa in general, is saying that this actually has prolonged the conflict. And I've been arguing very, very strongly from my analysis that there is an urgent need for policy review in the West for this. So these are my initial thoughts, but like I said, there is a lot to unpack here.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Simo. It's quite amazing. Like you said, I think there needs to be some policy changes in the West towards what's going on in Ethiopia. But you also see, the same stories happening in other parts of Africa, for instance, and the Western countries supporting the opposite. So it's not really a specific type of policy where it doesn't mean they're always either for the rebel group or for a dictatorship that's trying to come back. It's just, is it a self-interest? Is it why do we, expect Ethiopia to negotiate in this case when we know for a fact Finland or England or any other Western country would not negotiate with a group like this because even looking back at history when democracy or political systems were actually transitioning in the Western world, these type of challenges have arisen and have been fought through. So this is the time for Ethiopia or for other African countries to actually go through these changes in order to develop the type of governance they seek. So, I mean, just like Ethiopia and other African countries are making these changes, what type of policy changes do the Western world need to make in regards to basically accepting that these countries are evolving and changing?
Yeah, well, this was very sudden change because after the DER collapsed in Ethiopia, there was consistent engagement by the international community, mainly the Western development partners, there to develop the democracy, observe the elections, fund certain initiatives, and so on. So now, when this conflict happened and TPLF decided to make violence the option in politics, then all this kind of years and years of work building up democracy and human rights and rule of law has been thrown into the basket. So I've been arguing that we should return to the normal state of affairs, which has been that Europe and US and international community widely sees Ethiopia as a beacon of stability, like what has been written in all the policy documents for years and years in the West. If you look at the strategy for Horn of Africa and European Union, you look at what comes out from Washington, there is always the right argument that Ethiopia is the stability in the otherwise very volatile region. But now this stability argument seems that it has been put on side, and they are pushing for this kind of negotiations and kind of like unity governments that have been quite failure in the region. Like if we look at Sudan or we look at other African countries, that there is this civil war in some country, and then there is a push from international community for negotiation, and it leads to, after lengthy negotiations and also fighting among the parties at the same time, then it leads to some sort of fragile coalition government, which then collapses quite fastly. Like we saw in Sudan a couple of weeks ago, what happened to the Sudanese coalition government between the various Sudanese stakeholders. So what is the Western way of doing things should be that there is respect for do no harm principle, that we engage where there is some useful way to engage, and we support the legitimate democratically elected governments, and we don't undermine the governments by talking with some rebel groups or terrorist groups and putting into the same level like the legitimate government and so forth. So this is the I am saying that for international community, the governments in place, they are the only game in town. And then if this would happen in any other Western country, that there is a rebel movement or there is terrorism, we know exactly what would happen. There will be strengthening of anti-terror laws. Nobody would undermine the rule of law. What is going on now in Ethiopia, that Ethiopian legal system, which is quite capable in this stage dealing with the rule of law situation, it has been undermined by all kinds of international investigations, which will not lead to anything if Ethiopia doesn't cooperate with them, and rightly so, because they seem very biased from the start. So, and we see from this initiatives that even the whole continent stands behind Ethiopia. So I'm just saying that there is only so much that the international actors can do, but we see that this pressure publicly said that this pressure is aimed at both sides, the rebel movement and the government. But we see the same kind of dynamic going on, like we saw in the Ethiopian history already when Mussolini invaded Ethiopia from Eritrea, that there was League of Nations sanctions, but it only affected the legitimate government and didn't affect the aggressor at all. So it is the same that if you apply sanctions, the sanctions doesn't affect at all efficiently the rebel movement. They have their sources of support, whatever they are, but the sanctions are actually very harmful for millions and millions of Ethiopians who are completely innocent and who are suffering from these sanctions. And quite frankly saying, they will never work also. We see from the global circumstance that many countries have been under sanctions for years and years, and they will just not produce desired effect, like we see in Iraq, we see in Iran, we see Eritrea, we see a lot of countries under sanctions, and it didn't lead to the results that those who are putting in the sanctions in place. But what I have been arguing is this: what should be done in the West, in part of this policy review, is to look at the illicit money flows, what the TPLF has been taking out from the country during 3 decades almost. And there is very good instruments in the United States and in EU to freeze these assets and return them to Ethiopia government funds. So this should be looked into if there is a political will. But what I see, if we look at the situation, for example, now in Afghanistan, what happened there, that there was this 20-year international community presence in Afghanistan. But then what happened is that they had to withdraw finally. But I think there is this kind of saving of face going on in the corridors of power in the West, that they recognize their mistakes privately, but they are not willing to apologize and publicly recognize what kind of policy mistakes they have done in terms of Ethiopia. And this is very harmful, because in Afghanistan we saw that, I think, since very early years after Taliban was defeated initially, it was understood that this cannot be win militarily, and this was said by top decision makers in the West, but publicly it was always said that this policy is right, and publicly there was given a different message than what is said in privately. And this harmful cycle led to the years and years of international community staying in Afghanistan. And it is comparing Afghanistan to Ethiopia, I want to just give a disclaimer that Ethiopian situation in Ethiopia is much more stable and peaceful than Afghanistan. But I'm just saying as an example of how the international community mistakenly evaluates the situation, and this kind of evaluation, the mistaken evaluation, can continue years and years if there is not enough political will to change the policy.
Mr. Simo, I hate not to bring up the fact that, the international community policing, certain countries about their internal affairs, whether it's how to lead or how to respond to a rebel group, or how to have its citizens abide by the rule of law. How come we do not see the reverse? We don't see African countries policing European countries. We don't see them interfering in the United States affairs. And I think part of the reason that we actually have the No More movement right now is because the younger generation is somewhat offended by the type of relationship that the Western world has, specifically with third world countries, countries in Africa. The relationship is not a win-win type of situation. The relationship is not based on respect. The relationship is not based on partnership. It's more of a dictatorship type of relationship. And how are, people, let's say in Finland, the younger generation, the younger people who are in foreign policy, how are they looking at these type of movements and these type of changes? And we obviously know this is not everyone in every country system. We know that not every U.S. Politician is subscribing to this type of relationship, and the same goes with the European Union countries and so forth. And we obviously would want that mutual respect and partnership and relationship to flourish. So what are your thoughts about how it is in Finland, and how the other politicians within Finland are taking this type of movement?
Well, first of all, I want to say that people in Europe and maybe US also in the West are quite ignorant about what is really going on in Africa, and this contributes also to this very poor quality of reporting in the media, that what is really going on, what is the real situation, what is the underlying situation, and people are not very knowledgeable. So in this conflict, particularly what is going on in northern Ethiopia, it's that this kind of media lies has been repeated over and over again, and it has created the effect that somehow Ethiopian government is an aggressor, because this kind of mainstream media narrative has been repeated over and over again, and especially, okay, in Finland people are very trustworthy, they believe what is written in the media, but maybe some other countries they are a little bit more skeptical, but this has definitely contributed to people's misunderstanding about Ethiopia's situation and Africa's situation in general. So it is very, very difficult to expert like me to try to explain that, look guys, this is really what's going on. This is not the main newspaper here doesn't report accurately. They don't have any correspondence. They're based in Nairobi. They are just reporting hearsay. They are reporting something that the other side is feeding them, and it's very difficult to turn their heads. And this is what the diaspora also is feeling, I think, in US and Europe also, that they try to explain situation. They just returned from Ethiopia. They try to explain that this is what's really going on, but people tend to believe these big media houses like BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, even some of those, they believe what is written there, but actually the reporting has been very one-sided, silent on one thing, and then just concentrating on the mistakes that the government has done. So this has contributed there. And what I want to say about the relations between Africa and EU, that this has had a very harmful effect on the EU's credibility, that this one-sided policy, I think that Africa is looking at this is like a repeat of Libya situation when Gaddafi was falling, that Europe felt that something has to be done, but we see what kind of disaster followed in Libya. So I remember at that time I was based in Addis Ababa, and I saw that something has to be done for the dictator attacking innocent civilians, but then it completely led to disaster, and finally African Union and African side was right that it was wrong to intervene. So I don't see any problem that African Union and African countries could also intervene in our. We are not perfect either. There is a lot of issues in Europe. There is a lot of issues in United States, like racism, discrimination, situation in the prisons, minorities, lack of democracy, even lack of free press in some parts of the parts of Europe also. So there is a lot of issues that African side could also, like, if we want this relationship, like you mentioned, to be equal between Africa and Europeans and the West, I think we need really like this kind of arrogant statements and both sidesism to stop, that there is we don't need any lecturing. And I know that this lecturing will not ever work. It will never work in this kind of situation. So this arrogance and frankly speaking, kind of hidden racism has to stop, and we have to stop looking from up to down this kind of issues, that all these countries are just developing and they have their issues, and we have to kind of give them advice in every step of the way. So that's the kind of like this we would not lecture to other countries like this. So this is something that has to change, and I think this kind of mistakes that has been done now in terms of Ethiopia, and Ethiopia has been very effective actually saying that no more, this is enough, we are not going to listen to you, this is not helpful, and kind of protecting itself from this kind of interference. But it's still continuing on, so it's bad.
Do you think that, now that Ethiopia has said no more and has protected its sovereignty, and obviously there has been several punishments, starting from calling citizens to leave the country, to sanctions, to in general propaganda against the country. What is the next step? Where is Ethiopia heading, and how can how can Ethiopia overcome the challenges of the international community right now? And I mean, it's kind of hard to say international communities because it doesn't involve everyone, but where do you see Ethiopia moving forward, starting from now, with national dialogue? Initiation was announced today as well, and where do you see Ethiopia would be heading?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I leave this to capable hands of Ethiopians themselves to handle this issue. But of course, it's very positive to see that this national dialogue is going on, and I think it's the only way forward to have this kind of like a stock taking after so many years of this authoritarianism, which has been like a quasi-democracy, that there was elections, but frankly speaking, there was like a deep state running everything, the country. So and then the constitutional review also. But I think Ethiopia is we should also learn from what I learned from my days in Addis Ababa in East Africa was always that these ethnic questions and questions of identity were actually, there is a lot to learn for Europeans, how Ethiopia has handled this multi-ethnicity and respect for other cultures living in the same country as a unified nation. So this is something very commendable. But then it comes to the when it comes to the situation right now, I think still remains dangerous that it's anybody's quest that what will happen next. That now TPLF is surrounded in Tigray region, and what are next steps to be taken, and how could we convince that there should be return to normal politics? People in that region, they can have their voice heard by political means, by capable politicians, not by arms. So this is something that how can we convince the people there to abandon the armed struggle and return to the peaceful politics as one part of Ethiopia, which is the kind of only way forward. But the situation is in a way that the TPLF constantly tries to internationalize the situation, which is, frankly speaking, internal political situation, like in any other multi-ethnic country, like Nigeria or Canada or any European country like Germany or this kind of country, which is other part of the world, that is an internal political question. But whenever there is something happening, then the TPLF kind of blows the whistle, and they are able to mobilize this international community or parts of it to take the issue to the Security Council. But we see very clearly that African Union is being more balanced, that they recognize this, and I think other African countries, they recognize that the similar issues are happening, and we should leave other brotherly nations to deal with these situations. So this is the kind of situation, but it's anybody's guess what will happen next, and it's far from over. So I think the situation remains very dangerous and unpredictable, and especially if TPLF could manage some sort of outside support from somewhere. I don't believe in any kind of external intervention. I mean, that would be like a Christmas gift or New Year's gift for TPLF if there would be peacekeeping mission or this kind of mission, but I think this will be blocked in UN Security Council for sure by non-Western members, but the situation remains dangerous.
Thank you, Mr. Simo. I think you bring a very good point about how TPLF has been able to manipulate the situation internationally, how they've been able to call meetings with the UN Security Council and so forth. How are they able to do so? Is it because they've been in power for 27 years and they've had these personal relationships with people in power? Or is it financial, gains, financial transactions that they've had? Is this business? How is a group, like you mentioned, it's an ethnic group or it's a region in one area, and they have been downgraded from leadership to rebel group to terrorists. How are they able to manipulate the international media, the international countries, and places like the European Union to this extent? And they still continue to have that power today as we speak. And that's part of the reason why, that there is some danger today, because they are able to internationalize and blow the whistle at any given moment. How are they able to do that?
I think it's a core question you raise here, because it has been really successful in their part, that they have really been able from the day one turn black into white. So the facts are completely the opposite. First of all, changing the narrative in international media that putting Ethiopia in the aggressor seat, and they kind of persecuted minority group, and completely media has been silent that they have been actually the corrupted elite for years and years. So this kind of success of propaganda in their side. But I think it's a combination of ignorance also, that maybe some decision makers, they are not, Ethiopian situation and history is very complicated. And if you look at when the DER collapsed, it was the TPLF who was kind of running the show, putting all these things in place. And I compare to the situation in Egypt. If you remember, when Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, started in Tunisia by this unfortunate event when the fruit seller in Tunisia immolated himself, and then the whole Arab world, the street was revolting, and it led to the overthrow of Mubarak regime in Cairo, and there was demonstrations. So if we listen to I was listening to the memoirs of advisors of Obama administration, and they were explaining that there was this kind of old influence network that Mubarak was the main ally for US for years and years. And in the government system, in US system, in Pentagon, in State Department, in other parts of the security state, they were dealing with Mubarak and Mubarak's people for years and years. And then Mubarak was helping them in many instances, like Iraq war and these kind of things. So it's very difficult to abandon ally and friend in that way, even if they knew it was wrong. And finally it was done because it was the same thing. So I think the same thing is kind of true also with the TPLF. The TPLF was helping a lot of very influential people now in the Biden administration. I don't mention the names. I think it's all public information who are those, like these two ladies who participate in Meles's funeral, that they've been best buddies with the TPLF, and this obviously, this kind of influence has affected. And there has been cooperation in very key areas, which is sensitive and secret, like counterterrorism, fight against Islamists, and this kind of thing, which has been going on for years. So then abandoning this kind of people when the time has come to say that enough is enough and you cannot resort to violence in internal politics, and this seems to be very difficult. And European side, like I said, I think it's also like lack of understanding of those people who are doing the key decisions, like ministers, even some top bureaucrats. I don't think they are very knowledgeable of Ethiopia's situation, history, complicity. Maybe they are not being reported. I don't know who is pulling the strings inside the system of foreign affairs where, and who is kind of like biased against Ethiopia and who is not. But it is very, very strange situation. But it's kind of it has led to this situation, which is now that it looks completely. The truth is slowly coming out, but too slowly.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Simo. I know I would love to continue chatting, and you have obviously a lot of expertise in the Horn of Africa, especially Ethiopia. We are very honored to have you here on Prime Media. I hope to invite you again because, like you said, we still are not out of the dark yet, and I would really appreciate to get some insights from you in the future. I really appreciate you joining me from your busy time. Hope to keep in touch, and we'll invite you sometime soon.
Thank you. This was a great pleasure. Thank you, Lidet, very much.
Thank you so much. Prime Media audiences, this is your host, Ladette. I'll be coming back again with another guest. Thank you.